Hey everyone, welcome back. It's so great to have all of you tune us in and turn us on. It's great. Cultural Brilliance Radio, Claudette Rowley here. This is her show. It's fabulous. The DNA of organizational excellence. I get to share this with her. I'm Dr. Pat. Engagement, today's topic. Harness your organization's emotional energy. And boy, what we've done so far is we've talked about employee engagement and culture. We've talked about emotional energy. We've talked about leaders that could listen. And, Claudette, now we're talking about this idea of brilliant engagement, what it is and how it affects everybody across the board. It doesn't matter what age group you're in, what gender, what culture. We're now talking about brilliant engagement. Let's talk about that. How do you define this and how is it different?
So thanks, Pat. Brilliant engagement is occurring when an organization is responsive to the needs of its people. We see people are emotionally committed to the work that they're doing. They're really passionate about it. They come alive most of the time. Everyone has bad days. When a culture is brilliantly engaged, we also see that people feel like what they're giving to the organization, they're receiving back beyond a paycheck. So there's some emotional balance that they feel. I'm giving something, I'm receiving something back. I feel like I'm contributing. I make a difference. I know I'm valued and appreciated. I feel like people see what my talents and skills and strengths are, and they ask me to contribute those to the organization. So when people have that level of brilliant engagement, they're also really creative. They tend to be innovative, and they're willing to share the best of themselves with an organization. And I think a key point in this is none of this can exist if people aren't allowed to make mistakes and fail. But we cannot be innovative. We can't invent things unless it's okay to make a mistake and fail at something as long as you learn from it and move on. So in a brilliantly engaged organization, it's largely a learning culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do we deal with this in cultures that have been around for a while, right? Cultures that I was just thinking about this the other day. I have a friend that works at Procter and Gamble, and we were talking about the company and how massive it is. It's just gigantic. And, she was talking about what her journey's been like, what her career has been like. And yet at the same time, she says, I represent a teeny weeny part of this big organization. She says, I represent this little teeny part that most people don't even know Procter and Gamble has. And she said something interesting to me the other day, which I wanted to ask you about. She said, I feel lost in the scheme of things as a human being. She said, I feel lost. And she was asking me about, what did I think? And I said, it's funny, we're talking about this today. How did I feel about bringing people back to the forefront today? Are we ready to really honor people in organizations? So I wanted to ask you about that because you're talking about engagement, but you're talking about brilliant engagement. And, what is it about the work that you do that helps people not only be responsive, but allows people to, again, emerge beautifully and brilliantly?
What a wonderful question. Yeah. How do people emerge beautifully and brilliantly? When companies start to shift their focus to looking at the culture and how it's because culture drives everything we're doing all day long in certain ways. We have our own thoughts and feelings and make our own decisions, but it's within a container of a particular culture at any one time. So when organizations start to actually see that and understand how that culture is supporting people, how it might not be, one of the ways they can really allow people to emerge brilliantly again is by reconnecting to the idea that the only reason you have a business is because you have people working in it. That if you don't have people, unless you have a completely automated business that doesn't need humans, if you need any people in your organization, without them, you're not going to sell your products, you're not going to provide your services, whatever it is you're doing. So when organizations reconnect to the fact that people matter, those people can start to emerge in a different and brilliant way.
Yeah. You know, here we are, we're talking about energy, we're talking about cultures, we're talking about brilliance. You know, we're talking about cultures that we hear about, we know about. Just mentioned Google today a little bit, but it isn't really about that. It's really keeping up with the changing world. And it's hard for me to imagine that a successful organization, an organization that really is excellent, is going to be able to do that if they continue not to honor people and and talent in organizations. I'm really baffled by how fearful we have become of literally honoring people in organizations. You know, I had something interesting, an interesting thing said to me by a friend of mine who works at, I'm not going to mention the company name here, but a high tech organization. Let me say that. And he's a manager. And he said this to me, and I thought I got to talk to you about this because it's right here today. He said to me, you know, I listened to that show you did not too long ago, and he said, I listened to the show that you did with that person that's talking about culture, and I said, yeah, what'd you think? He said, I gave it to my boss, and I said, wow, that's great. He said, "Eh, here's his question. It was a comment. He said, you know, I'm afraid to be emotionally involved or emotionally engaged with my employees. And I said to him, what? He said, yeah. And I said, why is that? He said, it used to be you could work with people and get engaged and they would be with you for a while. He said, I'm just afraid to just share that emotional energy and then have to say goodbye to people. And I know we don't have enough time to talk about all of this, but I really want you to talk about this idea of social capital and emotional energy in these last couple minutes and how important it is to put our fears behind us.
What a wonderful question, and how honest
Yeah.
he was about something that I'm sure many managers and leaders feel.
Yeah.
And yeah, that social capital, you know, and emotional energy is inherent within social capital, because social capital is about what relationships and connections we have with people. And when you share emotional energy with someone, whether it's at work or personally, he's right, there is an inherent risk in doing that, right? That person will leave the job, that there'll be a layoff, that there'll be a reorganization, they won't be a direct report anymore. And so I think it's a really interesting place for managers and leaders to look about what are the benefits of sharing emotional energy with their employees, and acknowledging the downside and realizing that most of the time sharing that emotional energy is actually going to benefit everybody so much more. It'll benefit the business, it's going to benefit people in their relationships, and it's a huge part of social capital. And without our social capital, we literally can't work together effectively.
Oh, I know. I mean, we've talked about so much today. What a great show, Claudette. I want to make sure, again, we mention your website and how people can get a hold of you. And then I'd love to hear your closing thoughts.
Thanks so much. So my website is claudettRowley.com. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me, email or phone, or through the website contact form. And closing thoughts are, I would encourage everybody listening to really think about what emotionally energizes you, personally and at work, because those two areas feed each other. And if you're a leader or manager listening, think about what energizes and engages your employees. How can you harness their emotional energy in positive ways? And if you walk around your organization or listen in on conference calls, notice where people are alive and passionate, and then find out why. What's making those people come alive? And then you'll start to tap in to some of the sources of emotional energy within your company.
Wow, I love it. You know, this is a great show. I want to thank you so much for today. We've talked about a lot. And I want to ask you your final thoughts. What would you like to leave us with? What's your personal message?
My personal message is, remember that, as Peter Drucker says in the immortal words of Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so remember that culture, brilliant cultures, any kind of culture you have, are driving what happens on a day-to-day basis in your organization.
Awesome. Claudette Rowley, everybody. And what I want to say is please, please, please go to the website, claudetterowley.com. And, you know, we have lots more to come. It's a fabulous series. And, you know, for the first time, we are now talking, thanks to Claudette, about culture not just in the same old way, not in the tip of the iceberg way, but in an authentic way. All right, everybody, we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Cultural Brilliance Radio with Claudette Rowley. Conversations that are transforming the world of culture and business. You can download this podcast and find out more about Claudette and her breakthrough work at ClaudetteRowley.com.